Watson and Randy Lewis. There are two new interns in the program. Both are completing or have completed master's degrees in literature or American studies, and they're part of a new internship program which we have at the center. Some time ago, and I'm not sure when, I think it was in November, I learned more about some closed archives that we had at the Ransom Center. And I went through a long and convoluted correspondence, and also then spent some time at Cisco's with one of the persons in the correspondence, Warren Roberts, who helped me out a great deal in untangling some of this very complex web between a number of people. And Jim will talk about them today. And in our acquisition of this tremendous Faulkner archive, it's to Warren's credit that he spotted it when he was in Boston and was able to make a judgment on it in some very complex circumstances. And we're all, I'm especially grateful to him because it's an enormously valuable acquisition. Unfortunately, I can't say much more than that, nor can Jim, because a great deal of it is still under lock and key. But as of January 1, a large amount of that material has become unrestricted. We're now in the process of finding out what's there, what we own, what all the issues are. And Jim Watson has been working for us for about 3 weeks trying to untangle this enormously complex web. And it's an exciting and interesting story, and I hope he keeps it as exciting and interesting as he has already. Jim? Don't want to put any pressure on you.
Never have. I have some notes. And I want to begin by thanking you, Tom, certainly, for asking me to be involved in this. Mr. Roberts for the acquisition of the things that I'm going to talk about. And I must say the entire staff of this center has just been remarkably friendly and helpful to me so far. I don't know how much you know about the William Faulkner holdings at the center. Let me just sketch out some of the really super things that are available. There are 2 copies of 4 extant handmade plays, first plays called The Marionettes, which Faulkner handmade and handbound in 1920. There is 1 copy of a gift book called Royal Street, New Orleans, which he hand printed and handbound in 1926 for a woman who was to become his wife, but at that time was married to another man. There are 287 leaves of burned fragments of typescript poems, which Jim Stroud's department is slowly and meticulously bringing back to life. They were acquired in 1959, and the forthcoming issue of the Chronicle has a major article by Ellen Weir on those burned fragments, if you're interested in it. You have the typescript copy of Faulkner's first book, the 1924 poetry sequence, A Marble Fawn. You have the setting copy and proofs of his 1933 book of poems, A Green Bough. The leaves of burned fragments, many of them are previous versions of the poems published there. You have, as Judith Sensabar has pointed out in a couple of books recently, drafts for the 1921 sequence of love poems, again made for Estelle, Vision in Spring. You have the corrected typescripts of Intruder in the Dust, and one could go on. In short, the heart of this Faulkner collection makes the Texas collection, I think, one of the finest in the world. It is certainly rivals the Alderman collection, although the Alderman is a much heavier manuscript collection. You also have under lock and key from the Meta Carpenter Rebner collection the corrected galleys of Absalom, which apparently are the most heavily corrected of any of Faulkner's novels. And you have 40 love letters, also restricted, from Faulkner to Meta Carpenter, some of which are titillatingly quoted in her book, A Loving Gentleman. The two collections that I have been dealing with are the Carvell Collins collection and the Dean Faulkner Mallard collection. And I want just briefly to tell you the difference between them. Carvell Collins has a long association with the HRC and with Mr. Roberts. He began collecting Faulkner about 1948. He was then at Harvard. He subsequently moved to MIT and finished out his academic career as professor of English at Notre Dame. And in 1964, his collection came to the HRC in two parts. And this is where things begin to get complex. There were 11 gunmetal gray military boxes that they used to, they had some sort of optical equipment was carried in. They're about this size, I guess, and about this deep. There are 11 of them, broken down now. They have just been opened. And broken down there, they come to 55 Hollinger boxes containing 615 separate files. Each of those files contain transcripts of Collins's notes on interviews with over 175 people who knew Faulkner, many of whom, of course, now and indeed then are deceased. Collins's reading notes, news clippings from all over the United States, indeed from all over the world, reviews of Faulkner's books, off-prints of essays about Faulkner and about modern literature, a wonderful archive of photographs, reports from libraries. He wrote to every library in the United States in the early 50s saying, do you have any work going on about Faulkner? And back came the answers. There's a thick file of nothing, no response. There's a less thick file of things. Yes, someone at Wesleyan University is doing a senior honors thesis on Faulkner, et cetera, et cetera. The second part of that collection is called the red boxes. Same size box, painted red. There are 7 of them. And what Collins apparently did in 1964 was to go through his entire collection and edit out, I guess I would say at this point, strip it of what he called sensitive materials. Materials that had come through interviews, through correspondence, that he thought would be sensitive. And those are still locked. In fact, I don't think that he's found the keys for them yet. 196 envelopes. The envelopes, apparently from a hand list that accompanies these red boxes, those envelopes are independently restricted, and we won't know until the 11th of November of this year when we open envelope box 1, envelope A, what the instructions in fact are. But they have subjects such as alcohol in the left-hand column, and then there'll be a list of names, I would assume, of people who commented on Faulkner's use of alcohol. And then in 1969, Collins sent 3 green metal boxes for storage here, and I don't have any idea who owns them. As far as I know, he still owns them, and we are, I say we because I've been here for 3 weeks, we are storing them for him. Now, the second collection, Mr. Collins helped, I guess, to acquire, and that's the Dean Faulkner Mallard collection. Dean Faulkner Mallard, now Wells, is Faulkner's niece, the daughter of the brother who died in an air crash in the 30s. And from that collection have come catalog items such as the Royal Street New Orleans book and The Intruder in the Dust typescripts. The Mallard collection consists of approximately 150 letters from William Faulkner to his mother from 1918 to 1925. And what I'd like to do is to sketch for you what I think I've found and how I would evaluate what I've found, starting with the Collins collection. Collins had, I think, a real problem as a collector. His subject was a living author in a period, who lived in a region in Mississippi, in a period of time in American history, particularly a time of great racial unrest, of course. And it was hard keeping track of him because William Faulkner was an extraordinarily private man. So there was that problem. The second problem was that he was, of course, a practicing novelist who, in my view, was creating, helping to define American modernism, American literary modernism, as he wrote those difficult, enigmatic, sometimes terrifying texts. So that Collins's problem, any collector's problem, but certainly an academic collector like Carvel Collins, had a couple of problems. First of all, of course, he had to gather facts, biographical facts, certainly, but he had to gather historical and what I would call cultural facts. At the same time, he had to assess this difficult fiction which was being written, new novel at a time, and he had to try to bring those two realms together as it evolved and as the life, as the lived life and the emerging art became available to him. I think that is one of the reasons why this collection looks the way it does. Collins began publishing about Faulkner really in 1952 with a famous English Institute essay on the interior monologues of The Sound and the Fury. He subsequently produced editions of the early prose and poetry that Faulkner had written as a student at Ole Miss and in New Orleans in the 20s. New Orleans sketches, each with an introduction which was had a good bit of biographical information in it. Most recently, a little gift book, which is in the William B. Wisdom collection at Tulane, the wonderfully complex little book called Mayday, which has 3 watercolor paintings in it, as well as black and white illustrations, and a book of poems called Helen, A Courtship in 1926. All of those have increasingly long and complex and full biographical background to the material that's being edited. In the 50s, he wrote introductions to the Signet New American Library edition of The Unvanquished and Sartorus, and he still has not produced the biography that all of this collection was in support of. His reputation in the 50s and 60s was quite simply as the Faulkner expert in the United States, probably in the world. This is a man who traveled not only all over the United States, but to Japan, all over Europe, interviewing, corresponding with people who had known or had something to do with William Faulkner. And yet, one finds in the collection itself, as you go through folder by folder, cautions from people who don't understand why the book that has been promised isn't been forthcoming yet. Ben Wasson, Faulkner's good friend, sometime agent from Greenville, Mississippi, wrote him in June of 1952 saying, "I look forward to the Collins opus." He had just read an early book by Irving Howe. "Yep, go ahead and write it. You're going to get constipated with material if you don't get at it soon. So scatologically speaking," Wasson said, "eliminate." Well, the elimination didn't come about. At least it hasn't yet. He moved from the Atlantic Little Brown Publishing House to Farrar Straus to Random House, and still the major biography. At one time there was to be a biography while Faulkner was alive, and then subsequently a second version of that after Faulkner had died and some of the other people had died, which would be the more personal one. Tom Staley would probably use a baseball idiom, I think. He would say that Collins might say that Collins was all field, no hit. But he was a hell of a glove man, because this is a huge amount of stuff. I wanted to say something about the opportunities and what I think are the limitations of this material. And I've divided this into four categories which the collection covers. The first is historical. That is to say, material that has to do with American history, American culture, at a time in the history of the United States when this man was living and writing. In my view, I'm not a historian by any means, but in my view, I think that part of the collection has been superseded. We can look back on, for example, James Meredith's enrollment at the University of Mississippi now in ways that Collins, who was there the day before that enrollment took place with the National Guard in the streets and so forth, in a way that Collins couldn't possibly have, but struggled hard to and collected lots of things so that he could understand that material. I think that that's been entirely superseded. I don't think that there's much historical value there at all. Biographically, the who, what, where, when stuff. There's also a disappointing sense here that this collection has been superseded. After all, Joe Blattner published in 1963, I guess, Faulkner in the University, Class Conferences at the University of Mississippi, a catalog of Faulkner's library. These are things that Collins has tried to keep careful track of. And then, of course, in 1974, Blattner's two-volume, huge biography full of facts, revised in a one-volume version in 1984, and followed in 1977 by selected letters of William Faulkner, and even the uncollected stories are published. Now, all of these are things that Carlo Collins, of necessity, was trying to grab onto and keep track of. I mean, if a story showed up in the Saturday Evening Post, for example, he has the Post in the collection. But following Blattner's lead, David Minter published a biography. Judith Wittenberg published a biography. Recently, a man named Oates published what he calls a popular biography, and just in the last 6 or 8 weeks, Frederick Carl's very large-size biography, all of which are indebted to, almost exclusively, I think that would be right, wouldn't it? Almost exclusively indebted to the Blattner stuff, plus those introductions that Collins crafted for the little books that he edited. And indeed, Blattner takes account of Collins, and in the subsequent one-volume biography, Blattner includes a good bit of material there. One could go on and on. There's just a lot of publication in the Faulkner business, but certainly we would want to mention Malcolm Cowley's early book, the Faulkner-Cowley File, which is the correspondence of those two. Memoirs such as John Faulkner, My Brother Bill, Old Times in the Faulkner Country. Jim Merriweather, who worked here for, I think, a year, Mr. Roberts, put on helped mount the 1955 exhibition here, is the editor of Essays, Speeches, and Public Letters, of the interviews, Lion in the Garden, of biannual checklists of what has been published in what editions and where. The manuscript facsimile project has gone forward so that at Tulsa, and I suspect here, the facsimiles of the manuscripts of his work, as they are available, are now available. One could go on and on. I want to mention, though, 3 particular areas. Collins is indebted very heavily to Phil Stone, Faulkner's mentor and good friend in Oxford in the early years of his life. Now, in the 50s, Phil Stone was beginning to lose it. And indeed, Stone, there's a large collection of letters, correspondence between Collins and Stone in this collection, but Stone was writing to everybody, And what Collins couldn't know, what we know now because a collector named L.D. Brodsky has been publishing his collection, is that on the day that Stone would write and say thus and such to Collins, he was writing to Jim Merriweather saying the same thing, he was writing to Coughlin saying the same thing, he was advising Collins not to write a Harper's essay on Faulkner's private life, because Stone would say, I couldn't possibly involve myself in revealing anything about my friend. And on the same day, he's proofreading and correcting Collins's manuscript for Life magazine, or Coughlin's. There are a good bit of the Collins Stone collection has been published because Brodsky got copies of the letters from Stone. And indeed, I found, just a quick check the other night, 6 letters from Stone to Collins that are published in Brodsky that aren't even in the Collins collection. I assume that they are still restricted. In the second place, Ben Wasson, Faulkner's good close friend and agent, is a major contributor to the Collins collection. And was it 5 years ago, I guess, Wasson published his own account called Count No Count of, I guess, gave up waiting for Collins to do it. The third is the Meta Rebner material. She was Faulkner's lover in Hollywood. It's she who has the corrected galleys under lock and key of Absalom, Absalom. And it is she, of course, who published A Loving Gentleman, in which she quotes from some of the letters that are in fact apparently here and restricted. I think that what could be done biographically is a matter primarily now of caulking the seams in a chicken house that somebody else has built. There's a lot of detail, and someone who really knew the biographical material well could still, and Collins may still, caulk the seams of that house. He has been he's been counterpunching in these introductions. In the case of the introduction to Helena Courtship, he says, Blotner says that Helen Baird was in Pascagoula in July of 1926. And then he goes and lists the 7 other biographers who followed Blotner's lead, because Blotner's the one who said it, and she says, and he says, and he says, in fact, she was in Europe. Well, that's helpful to know, but it's not a full-fledged biography. And I haven't even mentioned the critical books, such as Professor Wadlington's recent book, Jim Merriweather at South Carolina set students to a novel, which they learn everything about, and those have been published, and on and on. Textually, this is not a manuscript collection. Faulkner speeches, sometimes the typescripts of his speeches to the Delta Council, the speech, the address titled If I Were a Negro, the corrected typescripts are there, and those would be interesting certainly to look at. Judith Sensabar points out that there are 11 Xeroxes of poems by Faulkner, and they are there, and I would have to check them against her accounts to see if they are considerably different. But essentially, this is not a textual manuscript collection. I would be the last one to say that there's nothing to be done with this collection in terms of critical responses, because I have experience knowing that what one person overlooks, the next person is the next person's meat. I had the pleasure a number of years ago of reading a paper about the letters in The Sound and the Fury in front of an audience which included, among others, Andre Blykasten, who'd just written a whole novel about the sound, or a whole book about the Sound and the Fury, and never mentioned the letters. So there are lots of things that are possible, and here are a couple of ones now. We've long thought, it's been rumored, that the terrible novel, 1931 novel Sanctuary, was based upon the actual life of a woman whom Faulkner had met in New Orleans, or pardon me, in Memphis, who had lived with a gangster named Popeye, the villain of the novel Sanctuary. Mr. Collins heard the same story, found out that she lived in a little town in Georgia, went there, found out that she had moved, went to the little town in Florida where she now lives with a husband who knows nothing about her, having once been in a brothel in Memphis. Talked with her and her husband, and when her husband was called away, talked with her, and she admitted that she is the Ruby Ann. So there, we know that. But that's the kind of thing that I think might be done there. My evaluation of the reading of those gray boxes, those 615 folders, is that that collection is hugely diminished in its importance since its acquisition. When it was acquired, there is no question in my mind that it was an immensely valuable archive, but it simply has been superseded. The facts have been assembled by other hands, and more important, those facts have been now recorded by other hands. What that leads me to is this, that the significance of the Carville Collins collection is going to depend upon the red boxes, which have not been opened. And as one reads through the material in this collection, one finds references to documents that simply are not in those gray boxes. The enigmatic hand list that Professor Collins supplied for the red, still restricted boxes is helpful in that way too. So, if there is in fact in the red boxes a worksheet for the Sound and the Fury, which he claims, then that would be an immensely important, potentially immensely important document. If there is in fact a batch of letters from Faulkner's mother to his aunt about him, that would be a potentially very valuable thing. If there is a document regarding Sherwood Anderson's reading of Faulkner's first novel, Soldier's Pay, which Collins said in 1952 was unpublishable for 30 years, that, I think, would be important. If there are important letters from, for example, a man named Dr. Isaac East, there's a whole folder for him. He was at the mental health clinic, I think at Byhalia, Mississippi, where Faulkner was taken for therapy from time to time. If there is a long personal letter there, that might very well be revealing. If there are sensitive interviews about the composition of Absalom, Absalom, or As I Lay Dying, there are 3 folders listed, 3 envelopes on As I Lay Dying. Those would be significant, and one could go on in this manner. In sum, I think that what is yet to be determined is this. What did Carville Collins consider sensitive in 1964? And more important, what would its sensitivity rating be in 1989? Because we already know that Faulkner had a lover named Meta Carpenter. She's told us about it. We already know that he wrote letters to her with metonymies for parts of the female body in them that I don't think my wife would appreciate getting and think of as love letters, but she did. We already know that he died at the Byhalia Sanitarium, where he was taken for treatment of alcoholism, and not at Oxford as his wife tried to arrange. I think that the whole business simply can't be answered now. It depends upon what did he consider sensitive, and I don't mean to say those aren't sensitive things, but what did he consider sensitive, and what would their sensitivity rating now be? Because I suspect that we already know a lot about it. So, Sally, I'm disappointed in the Carville Collins collection. In 1989, as no one could have been in 1964 when it came, and as no one would have been, I think, if Professor Collins had been able to write the biography, which he hasn't yet done. The second business is the Dean Faulkner Mallard collection. 150 letters from Faulkner to his mother from 1918 to 1925. Joe Blattner calls those the dark years. We don't know very much about Faulkner in those years. In 1918, disappointed because the woman he loved was marrying another man, he went to New Haven, Connecticut, and worked for the Winchester Repeating Arms Factory for a while. Then joined the Canadian RAF in 1921 and was demobilized at the end of the war in early December. In 1921, he went back to New Haven and then to New York to live with Stark Young and be a writer. And he worked there for Elizabeth Prowl, shortly to marry Sherwood Anderson in her bookstore. In 1924, and again in 1925 and 26, he was in New Orleans, where he knew Sherwood Anderson very well. In 1925, he was in Europe. Now, to write letters, one has to be away from home. One doesn't write letters, usually interoffice memoranda, but letters are generated by separation. This is was close not only to his mother, but to his father. In my book on Faulkner's letters, I found only one postcard to his father, and I surmised that he wasn't close to him. But these letters show that he wrote to him, regularly, and he wrote to him fondly. They show a young man who, away from home for the first time, is lonely and alienated. At the same time, they show a young man with increasing self-confidence about, for example, his size. He was only 5 feet 5 inches tall. He becomes increasingly confident about his size, about his southernness, particularly while he's in Canada and in New England, and who invents autobiographical fictions in his letters increasingly. So I think that biographically, this archive is of the first importance. Textually, it is also. When one says that there are about 150 letters by Faulkner, one is talking about new manuscripts. I mean, there are 150 new manuscripts in this collection. In addition to that, within those new manuscripts, there are new manuscripts because he writes poems to his mother in the letters. He illustrates them broadly with line drawings, very sophisticated ones, I think, of himself in uniform, of Yale seniors in their knickers who don't have to wear hats. I didn't know that Yale freshmen, sophomores, and juniors had to wear hats, although it clicks for me because in The Sound and the Fury, Quentin has to have his hat on. It's just an immensely important archive, I think. Critically, the generative images of writing that Faulkner was yet to do for the rest of his life can be found in these letters. Characters, setting, situation, language, events, and because I have the same problem that Colonel Collins had, I'm an academic looking at biographer's collection. I want to give you just one example of what I mean. Faulkner went to New Haven in 1918. In 1928, when he wrote The Sound and the Fury, he set the second chapter at Harvard, which he had never visited. Faulkner's Harvard is New Haven. Faulkner's, in fact, Quentin Compson's June 2nd, 1910 at Harvard is clearly William Faulkner's June 1918 in New Haven. And what one finds is both are lovelorn exiles. Here's the man whose gal married somebody else who goes off to Yale to visit a friend and live and work. That's the situation, of course, of the novel. Relationship with his mother. Gosh, he wrote his mother almost every day, sometimes twice. And the letters are addressed not dear mom or even dear mother, but darling Momsey. I love you more than all the world, Billy. They're a very, very close relationship with his mother, and in the novel, the relationship that Quentin has is with his father. The solitary idealist is evident here. And in specific letters, one finds, you can't call them echoes, foreshadowings of situations and events to come. On April 7th, 1918, he wrote to his mother that he had met two very interesting people. One, a shell-shocked World War I flyer named Bland. That's where Gerald Bland's name comes from in The Sound and the Fury and in stories like As Ad Astra. And a poet whom he doesn't much care for named Head. Now, Sidney Herbert Head is the blackguard who marries Quentin's beloved sister in The Sound and the Fury. I think the name Head comes from this man, and I guess I would argue that. But the name Sidney never struck me until I came across the fact that Estelle Oldham married a man named Cornell Sidney Franklin. So we have two of the names there. On May 20th, 1918, Faulkner quotes James Joyce's story, A Little Cloud. The not yet 21-year-old Mississippi country boy takes a walk out in the country outside New Haven on a Sunday where he sees the filthy, sturdy, unkillable infants of the very poor. And Tom, I don't know whether that's a precise, or Chuck, I don't know whether that's precise, but it's very close to what little Chandler sees. There's a manuscript in the Brodsky collection where he quotes another of Joyce's stories from Dubliners, and it's in the 40s. But it's fascinating to see him aware of Joyce to the point where he can quote him in 1918, because The Sound and the Fury is going to devolve a great deal from Joyce's technique. And then there's the blockbuster letter. On June 2nd, 1918, I kept the shivers when I read June 2nd, because I get it now. That's Quentin's day. Rick can tell you one day years ago at Target, I wrote a check, and I wrote June 2nd, 1910, and there was no way to explain to the cashier there that what had happened. I just tore it up and rewrote it. He wrote, Phil and I, on June 2nd, 1918, it was a Sunday, Phil and I rode the trolley 9 miles and saw the boat race between Harvard and Yale, the crew race. I think of Quentin, it should be nice for them down at New London. Why wouldn't it? Month of brides. It took us 3 hours to get back. Never had such an uncomfortable trip in my life. That trip is described in great detail in the novel. It was worth it, however, for the race was wonderful. We have the date and the race in that letter. In conjunction with that, in the same letter, he describes the Decoration Day parades the week before. The country boy from Oxford had never seen lots and lots of parades. He says, and I'm quoting, even the Italians had a parade, including one nigger with an Italian flag and a cigar. A deacon is in the Italian parade on Decoration Day in The Sound and the Fury. Deacon is the black man who cigars are also important, but Deacon is the black man who dresses up in Italian uniform. And I think he's also indebted to, I now think, as of about 5 o'clock this morning, so this is keeping me awake, to a man I didn't know existed named Blind Jim, the Dean of Freshmen at the University of Mississippi, who for 50 years, a blind minister, deacon is a lay minister, who for 50 years, having been made blind by an industrial accident, sat on the University of Mississippi campus and declared it with a sign that declares himself the Dean of Freshmen, and freshmen would walk him from place to place. A deacon takes care of the freshmen in the novel. And then, in the same letter, I went out to South Beach this afternoon and had my first swim in the ocean. I don't see how anyone ever drowns in the sea. Well, we have the date of Quentin's drowning in this one letter. We have the boat races. We have Deacon. We have cigars. This is all packed into a single letter that he wrote to his mother the 2nd of June. I want to finish by saying that the letters in selected letters, often enough, are pretty dull stuff. They're not attempts at. I had argued that they're a canon of writing, and I think they are imaginative canon, but few of them, relatively few of them, I think, are really poetic letters. These letters, however, are immensely poetic. The letter writer is really trying to make scenes and people and his feelings come alive for his correspondence. And often I think he's fictionalizing himself. On October 7th, 1921, returning to New Haven after a time at the University of Mississippi, Faulkner, who we remember saw the ocean for the first time. I didn't know that. I just assumed he'd gone to Pascagoula as a child in the Gulf of Mexico, but he doesn't go to Pascagoula, I now know, until 1925 with a man named Harry Reynold, and he doesn't like it. But New England he loved, and he wrote this paragraph. There's only one sensation to be compared with seeing mountains, and that's seeing the ocean again. Coming up along the Sound yesterday, as he returned to New Haven, I was looking for it all the time. There's a strange feeling in the air. You pass through tight little New England villages built around plots of grass they call greens. The sky toward the sea is pale, about the color of salt, against which the inevitable white church spires are drawn clearer and whiter still. Everywhere the trees are turning. Fall has already come here. Ferns and gum trees, all the underbrush is yellow and red, and over the whole thing is a queer feeling, an awareness of the slow, magnificent ocean, like something you have heard or smelled and forgotten. Then suddenly you see it, a blue hill going up and up beyond the borders of the world to the salt-colored sky and white whirling necklaces of gulls, and if you look long enough, a great vague ship solemnly going somewhere. I can't express how it makes me feel to see it again. There is a feeling of the most utter relief, as if I could close my eyes, knowing that I had found again someone who loved me years and years ago. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about this that I can. I think you have, I think, though, that you have a marvelous resource in that, and I suggest that people will be coming for a long time hence to study here with you. I'm certainly grateful to you all for the opportunity to be able to record a passage like that and then read it. Tom? I know that...
You feel that these letters transform or really alter full sense of Faulkner's life for you?
Oh, I think they transform it for me.
Oh, they do.
And I think, Tom, that my guess would be that this would be the last major find of this kind. I just, of course, as your own experience tells you, there's no last. But given what we know about who he wrote to and so forth, I can't imagine that anything quite like this would ever come up again, because you see it 10 to 7 years right out of the time between he's 20 and then he's 27. From the time when he's an unpublished poet writing love sequences like Vision in Spring to the time when he's a published novelist.
Well, I mean, it's dawning in a way that it's probably the first time that passage you just read, the ocean, has ever been read publicly, or hasn't been read aloud.
That's right.
Well,
I
good with that, but the point I'm making is the rotten biography has this dark spot, right? And obviously the Carl biography does as
family relationships, as I tried to suggest, the literary relationships. He's conceived of, now wouldn't it be, he's conceived of The Sound and the Fury, whether he realizes it or not, in 1918, 10 years before he wrote it. Wouldn't it be wonderful to find, as Collins claims, but I haven't, that, well, there's a man named, a photographer in Paris in 1925, who says that in one of the interviews that Faulkner told him the story of the Compson family. Wouldn't it be wonderful to find a worksheet for The Sound and the Fury that would fit in that pattern? The gift book Mayday is clearly a preparatory piece, and Professor Collins has said that and said it convincingly. But I guess I'm very close to this right now. It's hard to.
Do these letters refer to his writing?
Oh yes.
His desire to become a writer, his sense of writing, the idea of crafting these letters beyond the immediate audience of the receiver, the mother.
Yeah, I mean, he'd be.
That
he'd
doesn't sound like something you write to your mother.
Well,
Maybe you do.
Faulkner's mother was aesthetically inclined and encouraged, a painter herself who encouraged him in.
But he's writing beyond it there.
Oh yes, I mean he's really trying out language, written language. Yes, sir.
One of the things that really interested me, Tom, in the vein you opened up there, is this your startling statement to me about the letters, their correspondence to the father, because like most of us, like you, I guess I assumed that there just wasn't any relationship to the father after a certain point when he stopped hunting with him. And even that was a kind of troubled relationship, if we call it block. Okay. But I mean, what are these letters like? You said that they're more than postcards; they're real letters.
Well, they're actually, there's a letter to his father from Italy where he draws a train engine and talks about trains because his father had been a trainman. And then there's a postcard from France about racing. Period. I had assumed, perhaps you had, that his father was pretty sick and tired of this 21 and 2 and 3 and 7 and 8-year-old bum who didn't have a job, who was writing letters to Darling Momsey, who was in Europe and who was constantly running away from responsibilities, and I'd assumed that there was no relationship there. They are letters in which his father supported him financially. I got the money draft. I got your check. Stuff like that. I spent the afternoon picking out this pen for you. It has interchangeable nibs on it to get my money's worth, and you to get the gift for it. If it's not the right tip, let me know. They're very friendly letters, and I mean the kinds of letters that a man would, I would think, I can easily see writing to his father. Lautner told me not long ago that he had run across Murray Faulkner's journal. The father kept a journal, and in it he had come across two surprising things. One, that Murray Faulkner, had tried to write a novel, and two, a statement one day with an exclamation points. It says, "William's novel is to be published." I mean, immensely proud of his son, and this will, I think, change that, because there are a couple of dozen letters, either to Dad or to Mother and Dad, and so.
Interesting for you to go back and read Faulkner.
Oh yes.
Just in that period.
Carl's in the same place where Wick's book is. Yours is ahead of him, though. He's only been out for 6 weeks. We have a problem, and I think you said this sounds like a Joyce meeting. The problem is that there's so damn much published about Faulkner. I mean, there must have been 10 or 12 books last year. That unless you have a grant, you can't read them all.
His father called him William, not Faulkner.
Billy, that's right. He called his father Pop, but insisted that his children call him Pappy. And one more thing. There's evidence here that he flew, that he actually did fly in Toronto. Now that doesn't seem like a big thing to you maybe, but he says that he has 4 hours. But you can almost see him constructing this business as the war it's almost over now. Thank God I have my 4 hours in, he says. And that for a long time there was some confusion. He loved the Royal Flying Corps, the guys with the what I call riding breeches and the Sam Brown belts and so forth. And when he joined, however, it was the Royal Air Force, not the RFC, the RAF. After 6 months almost in the RAF, he writes to his mother, "I'm going to be demobilized from the RFC next week." And it was always RFC when I mean, this was one of his most fondly kept self-fantasies, that he had been a pilot. Gee, in 1944, he's writing to his nephew, who's going to fly fighter planes off he's a Marine, who's going to fly fighter planes off a carrier. And he sends him the pip from my shoulder, from my uniform. He says, "I would send you my dog tag, RFC, but the Germans got it when I crashed behind the lines. I'm probably on their list as a member of as an English spy, and this is a guy who didn't get to England until 1925. In the same month, incidentally, he's writing to Malcolm Cowley, who was writing an introduction about this matter, saying, "Look, don't say anything about my war experiences. It's probably, just say, did what everybody else did in 1918, which itself would have been fascinating. Well,
Jim, thank you very much.
well, thank you again for having me. I have a new theory. Let's go over here to the book. Yeah, do indeed.
What happened to Marvel?
Well, now that's a very interesting question. The last time I saw him was about 3 years ago at the Modern Language Association, where he read a paper on the same panel with Blotner, the first time they'd ever been on a panel. And Joe read the best paper I've ever heard him read, and Collins had one of these machines, and he talked his paper, and it went on and on and on, and it got lost, and he's living, I believe, in San Diego.
He's old. How old is
He must be 78.
He's older than that, sure he is.
Well, I don't want to be mean-spirited about it, but
I think he's a good bit older than I am. And I mean, I've always had that feeling that he was a good bit older than I am. I'm 73, so he's got to be.
about 5 years ago, a friend of mine named Jim Hinkle, who teaches at San Diego State, told me that Collins had asked him to help him write the biography.
Oh, really?
And because he has a copy of this collection. He has a photocopy of it that he, I guess, works from. But I don't know. There's nothing.
Wondered, I just sort of had the impression that he must have sort of deteriorated to the point where he was, practically not operating.
Well, somebody pretty soon is going to have to write to him, and we'll find out maybe. I don't know. As I say, I've only met him the one time. But he brought a great deal of the collection here, great deal of the Faulkner material here.
Oh, he did, yeah.
And he was a collector of all sorts of. He was just a genuine collector, I guess, wasn't he?
Oh, yes, he didn't have the disease. That was really what he should have been instead of trying to be a biographer. I mean, obviously it's not a biography because he didn't do it. It's everywhere.
Well, demographically, remember that just before we opened the gray boxes, the day you opened the gray boxes, we received word back from the bookseller that we had missed the beer poster, which we had forwarded something over
The beer broadside.
the broadside, yes. And the next day, you came to me with a smirk on your face and said, well, it was
It may be here. There's a copy of it. It's not there's not an original. No. No. There's a lot of photocopies here. There are a lot of strange things. For example, at one point he describes there was a very interesting time in 52 or 3 when Faulkner spoke at the meeting of the Southern Historical Association in Memphis, Tennessee. There was a black man named Mays on the panel with him, and it was the first time a black man had ever eaten a meal in the dining room of the Peabody Hotel. And Faulkner spoke, and this man spoke, so that it was a very famous meeting. And Collins describes in some detail the program from this meeting, which is part of his collection. And he describes it in one of these transcribed interviews as he's talking to himself. Mine is covered in heavy manila paper, and there are photographs of the participants and so forth. But what's in the collection is a Xerox of it. So one wonders. I don't know whether I'd have given that up or not.
Zachary Scott Ruth Ford archive is Malcolm Cowell material, and we know that Ruth Ford was close to Faulkner. I know that did they do that?
Yes, there is. Ruth Ford's collection has been sold to L.D. Brodsky. But there are reviews of the Requiem for a Nun play, in which she plays Temple, and Zachary Scott played Gavin Stevens, I believe. And there is indeed some, I meant to tell you that, there is some Zachary Scott. The other night when you told me that you knew them, I meant to tell you about the next day. I ran across their names. There's a whole file that says Ruth Ford, and then she's listed under Requiem for a Nun as well. Scott did not get good reviews for his part, although hers were quite good. Yeah. As I say, it depends upon the eyes with which this is seen, and the only eyes that we have at present are mine. But someone with a different orientation might come to this material and say, "My God, there's a wealth of stuff here." Just let me give you one other example. He worked real hard in Hollywood. He was at Stanford for a term teaching, and he worked real hard to try to find out who Faulkner knew there and what films he worked on. Well, that's without his help, because this has been all locked up. We know all of that now, and the manuscripts are in the Brodsky collection and published. And it's just, it's a very sad story in a way.
As a proper scholar, I wouldn't want to make any generalizations about something such as this, but what do you think this points to the wisdom of accepting collections, purchasing collections, restrictions of this kind?
Well,
Or of any length?
I'm again it, because I'm, and I guess Chuck would be, I mean, we all would be. Here's what I can't help thinking that the book I published 2 years ago would have been a much stronger book if these letters had been available. And I can't help thinking that the biography we've been working from, if these letters had been available, would have been a much fuller. I mean, we wouldn't have spent a lot of time speculating about things that are. And some of the speculations are right, and there are a lot of people who are going to be happy to see that. But, gee, the Mallard collection came here in '61. It was reserved for 5 years, and then it stayed on reserve. It stayed sealed. Collins wanted to work, of course. He wanted it sealed for 25. His sealed for 25 years, or until I finished the biography. And I can understand that, certainly, but it seems to me a long time. Now, I guess Mr. Roberts was involved in that, and I probably shouldn't say any more about it, but I,
You
it
have
seems
the
to me.
choice of not having them or having them.
Yeah, exactly that, you see. If you're not gonna, if you're gonna get them,
And also, there are lots of ifs in there, you know. If the person that everything that was ever going to do somebody could do the final work, the right thing to whoever does the final work.
that's right.
And there were clear indications that Marvel Collins intended to publish.
Everybody
the
expected those
biography in a
books to be
reasonable
underneath.
amount of time,
Yeah, I mean, in 1952, you see, he was going to publish it. In 1963, he wrote a whole series of letters that said, and these are in there to the people he wrote to, saying, having promised William Faulkner that I would not publish a biography during his lifetime, I'm now proceeding with the publication so that his life story can be told. And that was with Atlantic Little Brown. Then he switched publishers to Farrar Straus, and an editor there named Giroux, who is now a partner, writes to him and says, "I'm so pleased that I'm going to be editing your book."
Giroux is retired, by the way.
Well,
Now,
and the next time you find him saying anything, he's working with Random House. So.
Poor Carl was really neurotic about this, you know.
Oh.
He went with his publisher, and he got a huge advance. He lived off it. Many times after he had to repay that advance because he switched to another one.
Yes, I
And then he
remember that.
switched to another one, and, you know, and
Well,
he could never bring himself to the point of accepting the situation, saying, "This is it, I'm doing it now."
the stories.
He hadn't done it yet.
No, the stories that you hear about him in Mississippi. Maybe you've heard some of them, Rick, about him traveling with a rental van and these steel filing cabinets in the back of the van. And when he went to, he took them with him wherever he went, so that it was back.